Morning. Hey, if you had your phone out to check in on Facebook, you can go ahead and keep it out. If you didn't get your phone out, I'd like you to take it out this morning. So take your, whatever you got, iPhone or Android or flip phone maybe, or some of you still have those. And if you don't have a smartphone, this is not going to help you much this morning. But take it out and go to whatever you use in your phone for notes. So like for my iPhone, I actually just have notes. I click on it right there, and bam, there it is. So I know some of you have like stickies or whatever it might be. So we're going to have a little bit of interaction today, and I want you to have your phones out. No, no problem if you do. I won't take offense at all because I've asked you to do it. So while you're taking your phones out and while you are opening your notes section, I want you to also multitask here, and I want you to think about a person that you consider to be like holy. Like, who's a person that you either know, personally in your life, that you've seen maybe on TV, that you've read about, you've seen, a documentary about or whatever, but you consider them to be holy. It could be the Pope. A lot of people consider him to be incredibly holy. That's why people, when he comes to visit, flock by the hundreds of thousands just to get near him or touched by him or whatever. It could be a host of other people, but think about somebody that you consider to be holy. So keep that person in your mind. Just kind of an introductory thing. So when I grew up in church, as you know, if you've heard me talk here before, but I didn't actually start following Jesus until I was 18 years old. And, the first few years of me following Jesus was definitely a series of ups and downs. And what I mean by that is that when I first became a Christian and really went after it, I was what they could say on fire. Maybe you've heard that term before. I was on fire for Jesus, right? That's just everything, was about Jesus, reading my Bible all the time, going to Bible study, going to church, staying away from all the sins that I'd been doing before, all that kind of stuff. I was on fire. But then after a while, I don't know, just to say 6 months maybe, then I wasn't so on fire. And then I'd kind of like return to a bunch of things I used to do, kind of forget about church, kind of forget about reading my Bible, forget about, a lot of those things. And then after some time of that, then I'd go back and be on fire again. And then after some time of that, I'd go back and I'd be kind of like flat again. And I remember even, being in Bible college. I remember this time of like we had the spiritual emphasis week in Bible college, and we had these speakers come in, and it was great. And I remember just feeling very convicted afterwards that I needed to go back to my dorm room and destroy all my secular CDs. I don't know if anybody's ever had that experience before, but I went back and just smashed them into bits, and it was this big like thing. And then I remember about 6 months later starting to buy them all back again because I was like, oh, what did I do? So I had this series of ups and downs, but then, about age 21, 22, right around my 22nd birthday, I became a pastor. And when I became a pastor, I thought that I would get like a halo, like around me, like I would become very holy instantly. It would all be smooth sailing from there on out. No more ups and downs, no more highs and lows, no more back and forth. I just would suddenly be like, glowing basically a little bit when I walked around. But it didn't happen that way. And then I thought, well, maybe it's because I'm just a youth pastor. Maybe when I become a head pastor, then I'll get like the halo. Then I'll get the holiness aura or whatever, and then I'll be in the state of perpetual holiness. And then I became a head pastor, and I felt pretty much the same. It didn't happen for me the way that I thought it might. And here I am now 19 years later, and I've experienced all sorts of ups and downs and in-betweens when it comes to my relationship with God. And what I want to talk about today is one specific aspect of the Christian journey that I think is not talked about enough from up front, just in general. But before I do that, I want to define what I think are the 4 aspects of the Christian experience. Now, you might think there are more than these. You might think that I missed something, but I've grouped these together under a pretty large umbrella based on my experiences as a pastor for the past 19 years and as a Christian, of course, for a little longer than that. So have your phones out again. And I want you to take notes on these, and I'm going to ask you a couple questions as we go. So the first aspect of the Christian experience is, in my opinion, what I call the mountaintop. The mountaintop. And we have, there you go, beautiful picture of some mountains there. The mountaintop experience in the Christian life looks something like this. It's where everything is just alive. You know, you're hitting on all cylinders. You read your Bible, and every time you read it, something jumps out at you new. Something changes you. You're just like, you can't get enough of reading the Bible. It's new revelation all the time. Every time you go to church on a Sunday morning, the sermon seems like it's just for you. Like every worship song that they sing on Sunday mornings relates to you. You turn on your radio, and all the lyrics on the radio are like, oh, that means so much to me. Like every prayer you're praying seems to get answered, or things are just very smooth. You know, it's where you're 20,000 feet above sea level. In other words, you're so high up, everything down there, the problems of the world, the troubles, the struggles, the anxieties, the stresses, they all seem very far away. You have this fresh air, this incredible perspective. You can just see all these problems that maybe would normally bother you. They're just like so tiny because of where you're sitting. It's the mountaintop experience. You know, in the Bible, there are many examples of people who had mountaintop experiences, both figuratively and literally. So like Moses in the Old Testament has a literal mountaintop experience. He goes up on the mountain, and God gives him the 10 Commandments. It's this incredible, holy moment, right? He's literally on a mountaintop, and he has a mountaintop experience. Elijah, a prophet of God, has another literal and figurative mountaintop experience. He's on Mount Carmel on the top of it, and he has this contest with the prophets of Baal. Maybe you've heard this story, and God shows up in this major, powerful way, and Elijah's just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, right? This mountaintop experience. David had a mountaintop experience when he battles Goliath. He goes against this giant, and he's like, I don't care who this guy is. Our God is bigger. I'm taking him down. And you know the rest of the story. It's this incredible thing. And as David walks off the battlefield, people are singing about him. They're singing, David is slain his tens of thousands. He gets a wife from Saul. He doesn't have to pay taxes ever again. He's just set up. It's this mountaintop experience, right? Peter, James, and John, 3 of the disciples, Jesus' inner circle, they have this literal and figurative, again, mountaintop experience when Jesus takes them up on what's called the Mount of Transfiguration. And while they're there, Jesus is praying, and like the heavens open, and Moses and Elijah are standing there next to Jesus, and Jesus is like transfigured. He's all illuminated white, and they're just standing there like in awe. They're just blown away. It's this mountaintop experience. So here's my question for you, and something you can write down. Think about it for a minute here. But what have been some of yours? Take a minute, think about it, and then put it in your phone. What have been some or one or whatever of your mountaintop experiences? When have there been times in your life, whether it was a day, whether it was a week, a month, a year, a season of your life, whatever it is, where you have just been like on top of the world with God and your relationship with God, and you have that 20,000 feet above sea level perspective, everything is clicking for you. When has that been for you? When has that been for you? You know, for Jesus, one of his mountaintop experiences in his life was his baptism. If you know the story of his baptism, he's baptized, and as he comes up out of the water, the heavens open. The Spirit descends in the form of a dove, and his Father, God, speaks and says, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. It's this very powerful, transcendent experience for Jesus as he's about to begin his public ministry. This is what kicks it off. Can you imagine that scene? Maybe for you, one of your mountaintop experiences has been your own baptism. I know we had a baptism service here a while back, and for those people, I'm sure it was powerful for me. I was in tears both services. It's a mountaintop experience. For some of those people, it was probably like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. You know, I've had my share of mountaintop experiences, times where I've come back. For me, it's been a lot of times when I go to like a conference, and I'll come back from a conference, and I'm just pumped up. And I stay pumped up for a long time, and I just feel like God is so good, and everything's clicking, and oh, I learned so much, and let's go get them, and let's change the world, and all that stuff, all right? I have endless spiritual energy. It's just amazing stuff. But if you know anything about mountaintops biblically, and as you thought of your own mountaintop and wrote it down, you understand, if you've been a Christian for any length of time at all, that mountaintops don't tend to last very long. The air, as they say, is pretty thin up there, and you can't stay up there for very long. So we have the mountaintop, right? The mountaintop. The mountaintops don't last very long. I told you the story of Moses. He gets the 10 Commandments. And then what happens right when he comes down? They're making a golden calf. And he's angry. What are you doing? So he goes from, oh, to like, ah, just instantly, right? Even Jesus, he has his baptism and the heavens open. And then what happens right afterwards? He's led into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil for 40 days. And he doesn't get to eat or drink anything. That's horrible, right? So you know the mountaintops don't last very long. So besides the mountaintop, what's another aspect of the Christian life? The second one we have is the opposite of the mountain. It's the valley. The valley. You know, Jesus says in John 16:33, I tell you the truth, in this world you will have many troubles. And he goes on to say, to take heart, I've overcome the world. But that first half, when you're in the valley, you forget about the second half. In this world, you will have many troubles. This, in the valley, is the place where God seems distant, far away, almost non-existent at times. Troubles can overwhelm us. Many things can send us into the valley. It can be a series of extended financial struggles. It can be a marriage that's on the verge of falling apart or has fallen apart. It can be a series or a set of health issues, whether it's our own or our family members, or our extended family members, or our friends. It can be, rebellious children that you've prayed for to follow God, but they're definitely not. They're walking the path of the world, and it's making you wonder about God. These things, or it can be a combination. Maybe some of you are like, yes, 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 and yes. I've had all those and all at once. So sometimes these things combine, and we go through this valley. The pain can become too much, and it can be all-consuming. Dark clouds black out the sky. God feels so far away. I don't know what cartoon it is, but you remember that like old cartoon where the rain cloud is hovering above the guy and it's raining on him, and no matter where he goes, it's raining on him. Everything else around is fine. But that's what the valley feels like, that it's just a personal rain cloud that no matter where you go, what you do, it's raining on you. It's not working out too well. I think of the valley also like this series. Remember the old Indiana Jones movies? Anybody remember those at all? There's one where Indiana and then a little kid are in this cave, and they're walking. Remember this scene? And they're like, they're walking on, and it's squishing. And they're like, I think we're walking on something that's not normal floor. And Indy lights a match, and it's just bugs all around. And they're all on them. It's just disgusting. And they run from the bugs, and they run into another room, and they get away from that problem, but then they accidentally bump into something, and the walls start closing in around them. And so they're trying to get out of that, so they hit another thing in the wall, and then spikes come out of the walls. Do you remember this scene at all? Anybody ever seen this? That's what the valley feels like. It's like you get into one problem, you run out of there, another one, the walls literally start feeling they're going to close in on you, and then spikes come out of the walls. It just gets one thing after another. You're in the valley. You have anxiety. You can't sleep. You have panic attacks. It leads to places like depression. It's hard stuff. This is something biblical figures experienced as well. If you read the Psalms, there's a season in David's life, a long season actually, where he was running from Saul. He was running for his life. And he writes all kinds of psalms, basically like, God, why won't you come and avenge me? Give me victory over where are you? Give me victory over my enemies. What is going on? He's hiding from Saul in these caves. He's unsure. There's a time where David leads his men into battle, And while they're gone, enemies come and take away all their possessions, all the women and all their children, and even David's own men then turn on him and want to kill him. That's a valley, my friends. It's not a good place to be. Elijah, after his mountaintop experience, this queen named Jezebel, maybe you've heard of her, she threatens his life, and he says, God, I just want to die. He goes into this fetal position and just starts rocking it back and forth, and he starts just crying out to God, I wish you would just kill me. Just after a mountaintop, he finds himself in this valley. In a valley, we can feel desolation and loneliness. If you look at it, it's an empty place. So as you have your phones out still and you wrote down your mountaintops, maybe a more painful one to address, but what have been some of your valleys? When have been seasons in your life where you've had a valley? What have created those valleys? Has it been an event or events? Has it just been a string of things together? I've had, as you're writing that down, I've had my fair share of valleys. I've had things fall apart that I thought would last forever. Relationships. I've had people turn out to be people that I didn't think they were. I've had friends betray me. Lost relationships. I've had things that have sunk me into valleys. Things that became overwhelming. What have been some of your valleys? So we have the mountain, which, again, doesn't last too long generally. We have the valley, which we hope doesn't last very long. But sometimes it feels like it goes on forever, right? Third, we have the forest. We have the forest. The forest, in my opinion, is the place where most of us live most of the time. Where most of us live most of the time. Not always, because we have our mountains and we have our valleys, and I have one more to talk about after this one, but the forest is the place where I think most Christians live most of the time. It's the place where the Bible, for whatever reason, doesn't talk about it a lot, but it's this years and years of just normalcy, right? Jesus had 30 years before he began his public ministry of pretty much normal life. Moses had 40 years where he just lived a normal life pretty much before he got the Ten Commandments and led the Israelites out of slavery. There's a series of, even there's a part in the epistles where it talks about Paul and how it just says, and he lived in peace for a couple of years, nobody bothered him. It's okay, that's a lot of detail. Thanks. Can we have a little more than that? What did he do on a daily basis? The Bible gives us a lot of highs and lows and a lot of big events and a lot of meta-narrative, but it doesn't tell us a lot about the valleys. But we can assume through reading in between the lines that people sort of lived in these valleys a lot of the time. It's basically normal life. You're not too high. You're not in the mountain. You're not too low. You're not in the valley. Yeah, you have some ups and downs. The boat rocks a little bit from time to time, but it's pretty much steady, right? You aren't on a mountain, but you're not in a valley. There's growth right around you. You're taken care of. You don't have serious doubts about God's existence. Again, maybe not everything is as alive as you always want it, but it's pretty good. You enjoy coming to church. You enjoy the people around you. You're not struggling with anything major. And a lot of us, we live here for extended periods of time. Again, and we take this for granted a lot of times because then when the valleys hit or something, we're like, oh my gosh, can't believe I just had that 5 years of valley and I just took it for granted. But this is where a lot of us live, is the valley. The last one is where I want to spend the rest of our time on. It's what the topic of today's message is actually about. So we have the mountain, we have the valley, the mountain, we have the valley, and then we have the forest. So hopefully you're writing these down. The last one is the one I want to talk about, and it's the desert. The desert. The title of today's message, if you saw it either in the newsletter or on Facebook or even as you're walking in, is How to Feel When You Don't. How to Feel When You Don't. The desert is something like this picture. It is dry. It is barren. It is kind of just flat. And it's kind of just nothingness. right? There's no life, and then there's no emotion. You're just dry. Your emotions are flat. And this place is the place that you are in, okay? This is what I want to kind of differentiate. The desert comes when you have all these things happening. You're flat, lifeless, emotionless, blah, bland, and you've tried everything you know to not be in this place, right? So you go through all the Christian checklists, right? You make sure that you read your Bible, and you're doing it every day, but you're just like, I don't get anything out of it. It doesn't, nothing, it's just, oh. You come to church, and you're like, the sermon was okay. Worship was okay. I just don't feel it. You don't feel alive like in your relationships. You just kind of feel like blob, and you've tried everything to get out of it. All the tricks, the 7 steps to get out of the desert season. You've tried all those things, and yet you're still in it. And in the desert season, what's crazy, if any of you have ever been in it before and recognize it now, maybe I'm naming it for you for the first time, when you're in the desert, you almost long for the valley. Because at least in the valley, you felt something. Even though it was like pain and maybe negativity, and maybe there was just this, it was a tough season, at least you felt like something. You felt alive. You could cry. You could at least experience things. The desert, you're just flat. And when it comes to your relationship with God, the psalmist wrote about this, David wrote about this when he was actually in the desert. And he was pretty much stuck there. He wrote in Psalm 63:1, I don't have this on the screen, but he said, I thirst for you, my whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water. So David experienced these desert seasons. And he said, there's no water. It's a dry and parched land. I long for you. Have any of you ever been in this place? In the desert. It's dry. It's parched. It's flat. It's lifeless. All the Christian tricks in the world don't work to get you out of it. It seems endless. See in this picture, as far as you can see, you're just like, it's just nothingness. So the question I want to address today, just briefly, and we're going to fly through these last few things, is what do you do in this season? What do you do in this season? How do you respond? How should you feel when you don't? I want you to write these 7 things down. I'm going to spend about 2 minutes on each one of them, and then we're going to get out of here. Step 1, you can write this down. Relax. Relax. It's totally normal, and it won't last forever. Everyone, whether they want to admit it or not, when you think of that person that I asked you to think of at the beginning, that holy person, I don't care who you think of or who you thought of, that person has gone through a desert season. Multiple desert seasons in their lives. Yet they'd be willing to admit it. Relax. When you're in the desert, it's totally normal, and it won't last forever. And don't let anyone tell you different, that it's not normal. We live in this age, 2018, this sort of weird world of Christian celebrities, where we have, pastors who are very famous, who have YouTube, channels with infinite amount of followers, Instagram accounts with infinite amount of followers, and Facebook pages, and we know there are, certain churches that are famous, and they write books, and all this kind of stuff. And when we see that, what we're seeing, of course, is the very best side of everything. And what that does to us, sort of, whether it's intentional or unintentional, what that does to us is it puts this very unneeded and unnecessary and unhealthy pressure on us that we should always feel the way they appear to look about God. They're always posting inspirational Christian quotes. They always have this verse for the day. They're always talking about how great their Bible study was or how powerful. And you're just like, oh, why don't I feel that? And you feel shame. You feel guilt. You feel like, well, if I don't feel that all the time, then I'm not normal. No, you are. It's okay. What you're seeing through those Christian celebrities and some of the stuff that you read or books that are out there, it's a fabrication. It's an illusion. it's not the truth of what's really going on. And it's not healthy for us to try to feel that way. So if you're in a desert season, relax, take a few deep breaths, right? Place your hand on your chest and say, it's okay. It's totally normal. Give yourself some grace. Number 2, after relax, is cut yourself some slack. Pretty much the same thing, but I wanted to re-emphasize it. Again, everyone goes through it. You know what's hard when you're in a desert season? Is when you're around people who are on a mountaintop. It makes you feel that much worse. You're like, what is wrong with me? What is going on? They're all pumped up about Jesus. They're all connected to God. They're doing all these things, and I just feel flat and lifeless, and that makes you feel worse. Cut yourself some slack. It's okay to feel the way that you feel. Again, when you are in a desert season and there are people who are on a mountaintop, this is where shame starts to creep in. And we have to banish shame from our lives when it comes to our relationship with God. We have to get rid of it. Shame is essentially, at its purest level, is a product of religion. And religion is exactly what Jesus came to destroy. Religion is from the enemy. Religion is something that's always making you have to measure up, do everything just right, perform, be a certain way. And that's where shame creeps in if we're not doing that or we don't feel like we're measuring up. So number 1, relax. Number 2, cut yourself some slack. Number 3, don't try harder. This is so counterintuitive for some of you. You type A personalities. Because you're like, I'm in this season and I can get out of it. I'll just read the Bible more. I'll just go to church more. I'll just worship harder. I'll just do whatever. I'll volunteer more. I'll whatever it is. And you just get yourself all in a tizzy. You get yourself all worked up. And you keep doing it. And guess what? You're still in it. And then guess what? You feel worse. Don't try and get out of it. You know, I was in researching this message for the past. I've had quite a while to research it. I was just messing around on the internet looking at some stuff about it. And the internet is full of like 7-step programs to get out of a desert season. If you just do step 1 and step 2 and step 3, and then you'll be out of it. Anyone who's ever been in a desert season will tell you this is complete garbage. To put it mildly, it's complete garbage. When you're in a desert season, it's not as easy as checking off the boxes. Usually when you try to check off the boxes, it actually makes it worse. Here's what I would do instead. Instead of trying harder and doing all the regular Christian things, instead, and this could be a sub-point if you're taking notes, besides don't try harder, but get creative in your relationship with God. What does this look like? You know, for some of us, we're so pigeonholed into believing the only way that we can follow God or measure our relationship with God is by reading the Bible, going to church, and praying. And we have to do it a very certain way. And when those things don't work, we get completely paralyzed. So when those things aren't working, get creative in your relationship with God. Start journaling instead. Take prayer walks. Create art that's inspired by things that you're feeling. Don't limit yourself. And if you don't like those things, think of some of your own stuff. Those are just a few suggestions. But don't try harder. Instead, get creative in your relationship with God. Not in this way of I'm going to try to get out of it, but just in that point of relaxing, cutting myself some slack. I'm not going to try harder. Instead, I'm just going to do some stuff I wouldn't normally do and see where that might land me. Number 4, I'm sorry. Be honest with God about where you are. Be honest with God about where you are. If you read the Psalms, you'll see a guy who was very honest with God about where he was. All the seasons of his life, all the mountains, the valleys, the deserts, the forests, he talked about all of it. We need to become like that. Be honest with God about where you are in your prayers. He knows anyway, right? He knows anyway. The story that it's always been hugely pivotal for me in these seasons of valleys or seasons of desert is this really short thing of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. We see Jesus, who knew exactly why he came and what he came to do and why he came to do it. He knew who he was. He knew where he was going. But yet we see him having essentially a panic attack. And he asking God to get him out of it. And he's under so much stress, we're told that he was sweating drops of blood. Right? This is not the image of the, holy halo around, everything's smooth sailing, everything's fine kind of people or God that some people want to worship. This is God in the flesh crying out to his Father, if there's any way, get me out of this. I don't want to go through it. If Jesus can be that radically honest with God, I think we can be too. So be honest with God about where you are. The next one, we're getting close to the end here, is be honest with others about where you are. Be honest with others about where you are. Now, I want to give a caveat to this point. Don't just go around to everybody and be like, I'm in a spiritual desert. I'm so dry, so awful. Oh my gosh, it's terrible. Don't do that, okay? You have all known people that do that kind of stuff. And it's just really annoying if nothing else. But it's just not a good way. It's not a good way to handle yourself, okay? But what is important is to find some people you trust and tell them what you're going through. Because, again, they have been there. If they'll be honest, they have been there. And if they're good friends that you trust and they understand anything about Christian spirituality and following Jesus, they will not try to talk you out of it, try to give you 10 steps to get out of it, try to tell you just need to do this or that or the other. They will empathize with you. They will hug you. They will encourage you. They will pray for you. But it's important to do that stuff, to be honest with others about where you are instead of trying to fake it until you make it, instead of always putting on a smiley face and pretending that things are just fine. Be honest with others about where you're at. It can be incredibly freeing just to know that they've been there too. And that's why support groups start, right? That's why, look at the success of something like an AA, right? Why is it so successful and has it been? Because everybody knows where everybody's at. There's nobody there who's like, oh, I actually don't have a drinking problem. I'm fine. Just here to observe. Everybody knows I've been through something, struggling, and they relate, they empathize. I've been there too. Oh, let me help you here. The last two. Don't judge yourself by days, weeks, months, or even years. What do I mean by this? Instead of looking at your spiritual growth on a day-by-day basis, a week-by-week basis, a month-by-month basis, even a year-by-year or a year basis, extend it out. Look at your growth spiritually over a long period of time. Has anybody ever been obsessed with a scale? Obsessed with weighing themselves? And you weigh yourself like 4 or 5 times a day. After in the morning, you're like, yeah. After you eat McDonald's at night, you're like, no. But you're surprised, like, well, what'd you think you were going to get? But I've had friends who are like, their day is like dependent upon how the scale is. And it's just like, that is just absolutely so unhealthy. But we do this as Christians too. Our culture, and I'm not speaking only of our culture here in the U.S., but our Christian culture in the U.S. can put you in like panic mode if you're not careful, because you always have to be improving every day. You have to get better. You have to do more. You have to get closer to God. You have to be closer to Him every day. And make sure you're just every single day. How do you measure that anyway? Have you ever thought about that? How do you measure your proximity to God, spiritually speaking, day by day? Because one day you're like, I read my Bible 10 chapters. I'm close to God. The next day you're like, I didn't read it at all. I'm medium away from Him. The next day you're like, I watched something I shouldn't have. I'm way far away now. The next day you're like, I read 10 chapters. I'm back close to him again. And it's this total yo-yo thing, isn't it? Totally unhealthy. You know, there's this television commercial for the company Garmin. Anybody familiar with that? Anybody who runs or does triathlons knows Garmin. They're like the leader in, sports watches right now. And Garmin's motto, their slogan is, beat yesterday. Beat yesterday. As Christians, sometimes we're trying to beat yesterday, and it puts us in this perpetual state of like, can't do it. When you're in a desert season, don't fall into that trap. Relax. There's the guy who founded the International House of Prayer in Kansas City, Mike Bickle. He talked once about you should look at your spiritual growth in decades. So look, I just turned 40 2 months ago. So I should look, what? Am I closer to God now? Am I deeper in my relationship with him? Am I healthier now than I was at 30? That's a better way to look at it. So get rid of the day-by-day thing when you're in the desert. The last thing is remain obedient. Remain obedient. Don't compromise. Don't fall into sin. Because when you're in the desert and you're bland and you're dry and you're lifeless, and you don't feel anything, the temptation is there to make yourself feel something. And that's when sin becomes very attractive. A lot of times when we're in the valley, in my opinion, we actually cling to God. Because we're so desperate, we're so hurting, we're in so much pain, we will just stick to him like glue. And we'll look back on our valley seasons and we'll be like, oh my gosh, God was so close to me. He walked me through that. It was actually, it was painful. It was this amazing time of closeness with him. I'm not as worried about people remaining obedient in valley seasons as I am in desert seasons. The Bible tells us don't grow weary of doing good. When you're in a desert season, don't grow weary of doing good. In this instance, faking it until you make it is okay. So because you're in a desert, don't just shut down everything that you're doing. Don't say, well, I'm not going to volunteer for the Christmas dinner for single parent provision because I'm in a desert season. Don't shut that down because of that. Don't turn to the things of this world. Even if they're dry and lifeless and you don't get anything out of them, remain engaged. Why? Because the enemy hates it when you obey in the midst of a barren season. It's an absolute act of warfare. When you are in the middle of the driest season of your life and God feels distant and far away and hollow, and yet you still praise him, you still remain close to him, and you remain obedient to him. So what do you do if you're in a desert season? Hopefully you wrote them all down. Relax. Won't last forever. It's okay. Cut yourself some slack. Take some deep breaths. Keep moving forward. Be honest with God. Be honest with others. I want this, and I'm sure Pastor Jordan would say this if he was here, we want this to be a church where people feel safe, and that it's okay to say, been in a struggle for a while, not feeling it. Can we talk about that? I hope that's a very healthy place to be as a church. Let me pray. Get out of here. Father, thank you that you are close to us in the mountains and the valleys and the forests and even in the deserts when we don't feel like it. Thank you that you're always near us. Thank you that you don't judge us on a day-by-day basis, that your love isn't, as we sang earlier, isn't that kind of fractured. It's not that kind of up and down type of love. It doesn't swing with the tides. It stays incredibly steady in the sense that it's always maxed out for us. I pray this would be a church where people who are going through valleys or deserts feel like it's safe to come, safe to be engaged, safe to talk about what they're going through. That we would be a church that supports people who are going through that because we've all been there. Jesus, in your name we pray. Amen.